Ajnanamagyanatimirandasya Dhyanandanasalakaya Chakshu Anmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah Narayana Parayana Jarahankara Nasan Rupa Nugametra Prem Purushanate Namah Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yutapara Kamalam Shri Guram Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrahajatam Sahagana Raghunatha Vitam Twaham Sajivam Swadvetam Savadutam Prahijana Sahitam Shri Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Param Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishaka Vitamscha Vrindai Tulasi Dhyaye Priyaye Keshavasya Cha Krishna Bhakti Pradadevi Satyavate Namo Namaha Vanchakalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhaveva Cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. So, welcome everyone. Thank you for coming along. So today's topic is art and spirituality. I think that's what I call the class. So first I invite you to just sit up straight and tall and gently seal your lips, maybe close your eyes and just take a few deep breaths in and out. And make sure you're present in your body. Feel into the palms, the soles of the feet, the head. And just feel the expansion on the inhale and the contraction on the exhale. Resting the breath, the awareness at the lower belly. And just taking a couple more breaths with awareness on the lower belly. Allowing the nervous system to relax. And then just allowing the breath to return back to its natural spontaneous rhythm. And when you're ready, opening the eyes. So there's a pulse, an expansion and contraction, and it can be felt in the body, right down to the smallest atom, to the very edges of creation in the universe. There's an expansion and a contraction, a breathing in and a breathing out. And we'll come back to that a little later in the class. Do you need it? I'd like to start with a question. What is art and what is beauty? So you can just take a moment to think about that, and I'm not asking for the dictionary definition, but what does art and what does beauty mean to you? What does it invoke to you? So you can discuss that at person next to you if you like, for a minute or two, and then come back with your answer. You can think about it. Art and beauty. There's no right or wrong answer.
Beauty, I mean, beauty, every culture has different ideas of what beauty is. I think our beauty is very much, we're very much influenced by our upbringing and culture as to what we consider, what we consider beautiful. So it's hard to separate that from, is there, I guess it's for everything influenced by our surroundings. But
Are you talking to us or are you talking? Okay.
no one else is talking, so everyone's just listening to me.
Art and beauty. If you go to a museum or you go to a nice waterfall, it invokes something. So think about that. When you see something very beautiful, when you go to a museum and you see some art, what does it invoke for you? Because it's very subjective. So what does art or what does beauty invoke for you?
For me, now in my mind, art is like when you have some emotion or something feelings inside yourself, and you express them outside through maybe painting or music or kitchen cooking also, walking, talking. Actually, everything is art. And beauty is something that when you see it, if we talk about beauty as a form, everything is beauty actually. Also, art is everywhere and beauty is everywhere because God is the most beautiful artist. So, beauty is also something that when you see it or hear it or smell it, it completely captures you and you cannot focus on anything else, only on that. Like the topmost beauty should be that Manohara is called in Sanskrit, still your heart completely.
That's a very beautiful answer. So, just for the recording, I'll repeat what I remembered from that, and you can correct me. Art is something very captivating, and it can be expressed in all areas of life, and cooking. It's an expression from your heart, and beauty is also something that's very captivating. And the topmost beauty is to be found in God, and your mind becomes completely in wonder and in awe of this very beautiful object before you. Is there anything else you want to add to that? No? Next.
I really like that definition because, like you were saying, it's so subjective. And what Madhava said about sort of defining beauty, because it can be so hard to do, so many different forms, different people into different ways, is something that captures that person, really captures their attention and awe and wonder. Yeah. So I like that.
Yes.
I remember a class of Srila Guruji. He says when we see beauty in nature, for example, then our consciousness expands automatically. But nowadays, so many people, their consciousness is completely in Rajaguna and Tamaguna, and also we see the art nowadays. Gurudev gave the example, is completely crazy and it's not really beautiful. Like
We'll get to that. Yeah.
there's one example given. One guy and the cleaner in a museum. He was looking through the gallery and he mistaken a piece of art for trash and he threw it away. That's a modern art.
Yes, so in modern times it's very hard to distinguish what is art because art's very subjective, and I actually have a picture of that art display that got thrown away by the cleaner, so I'll share that a little bit later on.
Art isn't always meant to be, lots of art, the intention isn't necessarily to invoke the emotions of something beautiful. It can also be thought-provoking, you know? It's not necessarily trying to be beautiful, so you have to keep that in mind.
Yeah, and I think that's a very nice point that you brought up, that it expands your consciousness. Like if you're sitting in a very beautiful place in nature some waterfall, your consciousness expands and you feel like, wow, there's a feeling of awe, reverence, and like, nature is vast and beautiful. I'm part of something very great. And here's a couple of dictionary definitions of art. The term art: the expression or application of human creative skill and imagination, typically in a visual form such as painting or sculpture, producing works to be appreciated primarily for their beauty or emotional power. So they invoke a very deep emotive response, something that's art or beautiful. And another definition: the various branches of creative activity such as painting, music, literature, and dance. The quality or group of qualities in a person or thing that gives pleasure to the senses and the mind. Yesterday I contacted a friend of mine who's an artist overseas, and she studied art, and I said, oh, tomorrow I'm giving a class on art, what can you tell me? And then after she finished laughing at me, she said, art is the language or expression of the soul, period. So whatever is you're wanting to express from a very deep place, then that is art. But that's not necessarily what we see in art in modern times. So in Sanskrit, the word for art is kalaha, and kalaha means skill in presenting something. So like Madhava was suggesting, art can also be expressed in cooking. It can be expressed in your everyday job, like we say, someone really knows the art of that activity. So it's not just confined to painting or something aesthetic or creative like that. It can be expressed in so many different areas of life. And if we look through the lens for a moment of a more anthropological narrative or a historical narrative of art, then art predates written language. So before we could communicate in language, symbols were used to express communication, such as rock paintings, cave art, that kind of thing. And looking through like a historical narrative, I'm not suggesting that this is how it is, but what's presented in schools and educational facilities, often when we hear about cave art, we think, oh, it's some primitive Neanderthal, and they were just drawing pictures of what they saw around them, of the animals they were hunting and that kind of thing. And yes, there may be a certain level of truth in that, but if we consider for a moment the consciousness or the metaverse that those people were inhabiting, because from a historical point of view, anthropological point of view, it wasn't hunter-gatherers in the beginning. We were actually more like hyenas, and we were following the example of the hyena, because the hyena doesn't really hunt so much. They scavenge off the kill of another predator. So humans were very much like that. They weren't killing animals. If some lion, some saber-tooth, whatever they had back then, was killing some prey, then once the humans got a taste for meat, then they would go and scavenge off that carcass until another predator came along. And in modern times, we're still very much following the example of the hyena. I don't mean so much in eating meat, but how many people here can grow their own garden or can fully produce their own food for themselves? Maybe very few, or maybe one person, two. So very much we're still surviving off the remnants of other people, like the farmers, they're producing, we're going to the shop. So this is a kind of hyena diet, that we're not producing the food stuff ourselves, but we're taking the remnants from the work of another living being. So I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but I found it an interesting consideration. And in terms of the hunter-gatherer cultures, the animal of that they were hunting, it wasn't humans versus animals. It was beings versus another being, and we were part of the food chain. So very much, if you went out to try to gather food, you could very much be killed yourself. And it's a very different consciousness to look at the world through, because the animal that, if you did succeed in killing or capturing an animal, the animal was a source of food, it was a source of shelter from their skin, it was a source of clothing. So very much the animal was like a god. And so the cave art didn't just represent just beings that they saw around them, but there's a whole cosmological narrative that went with it. I could talk about this a lot more because there's very interesting points, but I'll move on from that subject. So art has always been a very important part of culture since the beginning of time. And art tells a story, and it informs and it guides culture. And formerly, art was very much expressive of a spiritual or religious narrative. And art reminded us, and it was a way of telling a story of creation, of our place in the universe, and our relationship with the spiritual narrative of that particular culture. And however they were expressing that in their form of art, it was very much based on a higher understanding of reality. And people value art because everyone's attracted by beauty. And so it's always been a very important part of our culture to express beauty. Just like the oldest known instrument that's been found, somewhere around 60 to 70,000 years old, and that was a flute. So if we look back through a narrative of what's taught in schools, then this was some Neanderthal or some caveman who was running around trying to escape the saber-tooth. But it was so important for this person to sit down and carve out the thigh bone of a bear and make a flute. And so rather than just being in a state of survival, even back in those times, the need to express beauty was there. It was very much prevalent in society or in whatever groups they were living in. So what was that person thinking as he blew the flute for the first time? What was he thinking when he created the holes in, or she created the holes in the flute? And how were they listening? Were they listening just with their ears, or with their whole body, with their palms, with the ground of their head, with the soles of their feet? So beauty the expression through the arts has always been a central driving force in humanity. And as I've already previously mentioned in these classes, the Sanskrit word for culture is Sanskriti, and culture means that which cultivates an expansion of your consciousness, opening and broadening that consciousness more and more and more, not just for the individual, but for the whole collective society. That is culture. And that which leads to the contraction of consciousness, that is anti-culture. So just like in Ayurveda, everyone is born with a particular prakriti, a particular nature, a particular ratio of the doshas, the body elements. And when your prakriti is when your material nature, when your body is in a healthy state, a state of equilibrium, then that is called prakriti. And when that state becomes out of balance, that is called vikriti. So the doshas in Ayurveda, Vata, Pitta and Kapha, Vata being air, predominantly the air element, Pitta predominantly being the fire element, and Kapha being earth and water. So different body types have these three different doshas in different categories, and we're all born with that in a fixed state. And over time, over lifestyle, sickness, poor diet, our born nature of prakriti can become out of balance, and that's called vikriti. And to get back to health in the Ayurvedic system, you have to follow a lifestyle and maybe take some medicines or get some treatment to bring you from an imbalanced state of vikriti back to a state of prakriti. So this doesn't just happen in the body, but it's also happening in the mind. So very much in today's atmosphere of the modern society, it is unconducive for the cultivation and for the maintenance of the state of prakriti. And so we're very, very much in a state of vikriti, a distorted and imbalanced state. Because Gurudev is making a nice point here. When you're in a state of prakriti, your heart is filled with joy, and you feel satisfied because this is your natural state. And so you can just look inside right now and say, am I satisfied? Am I full of joy? And if you're not, then you're in a state of vikriti. Because if I'm searching for something, if I have to get here, if I have to get there, if I have to do this and do that, then this is all like a craving coming from a state of imbalance. When you're in a state of sattva, a state of equilibrium, there's no need to, this energy of that desperate, hungry ghost is not there. There's not this craving inside. This constant craving inside. This is not atmaram. This is not self-satisfaction. This is self-dissatisfaction. And so when we're dissatisfied, then there's always an internal craving, trying to alleviate this unsatisfactoriness, which comes on a spectrum, because for some people their state of unsatisfactoriness is very overt, is very prominent, and they're very much searching or trying to make all kinds of arrangements in their life to come back to or follow an idea of how they think they're going to get back to a state of balance, of satisfaction. And for other people, that spectrum may be lower, so they are feeling more conditioned in their life, and that feeling of dissatisfaction is not so overt. It's not such a driving force in their life. But of course, in our conditioned state, this is always fluctuating. And so our soul by nature, it's very pure. It's Atmaram, as I've just mentioned, and it's self-satisfied. But this soul is covered in two bodies. Just like you have there's the body, which we'll say is the soul, and then just in this analogy, and then over the body you wear a t-shirt, and then over the t-shirt you wear a coat. So the first subtle covering of the soul in its conditioned state is the what's called Shukshma Sharira, or the subtle body, the subtle psychological body, and that is made of 4 elements. The psychological body is called chitta, and in its natural state it's very clear, like a very clear lake, and that from that pure state, that clear state of chitta, you can see the reflection of your own soul, and things are very you can see with the eyes of truth when the chitta is clear. And as the chitta, the mind space, becomes distorted, then it goes through a series of further and further denser stages of grossification. Just like if right now there's water, so much water in the atmosphere, but then the first phase transition is it has to condense into a cloud, and then from the cloud it condenses into rain, and then from rain it can come down here to on the surface of the earth, and in a very cold place it condenses into ice. So the psychological body goes through these 4 phase transitions of density, but it is the one base element of chitta. So the first stage of grossification, that is called ahankar, or ego. And basically our ego is like because we have so many impressions, so many samskaras stored in the subconscious mind, and from lifetime to lifetime, and these this collected mass of impressions in our subconscious mind, this gives rise to a sense of self. And these impressions can be positive or negative, and it gives rise to a sense of identity, because a lot of people actually find their sense of identity in very negative experiences. Whatever happened, it happened to me, and then I'm a victim of this and that, and they derive their identity from the negative experiences in their life. And so whether it's negative or positive, people are deriving a sense of identity from the collected amount of impressions, the aggregate of impressions in their consciousness, and that's called ahankar, ego, the first phase transition of the chitta. And then the next one down is called buddhi, the intelligence, because once you have a sense of identity, then that identity, once it has desires, it has some idea of how to make itself happy, so then it utilizes the intelligence, the next level of grossification, of coming up with ideas of how to make itself happy. And then the next stage down, further grossification, is manas, the level of mind. And then, so the mind is, the basic dharma of the mind is kalpa vikalpa, accepting and rejecting. So based on your sense of identity from the ego, then the intelligence comes up with ideas, and the manas is engaged in accepting or rejecting things to try and fulfill the ideas of the intelligence and ego, to try and make itself happy, because this ahankar, it's like a mask, and this is where the word personality is coming from. Persona, that mask that we wear, and we hide behind this mask. The soul is hiding behind this mask, and we identify with this persona. And practically everyone, you never are really interacting with the person on a soul-to-soul level. It's just 2 masks, 2 personas meeting one another. And when there's 2 personas, they meet, and they have some level of commonality, then you become friends with that person, or you enter into a relationship, or this or that. And of course this is just normal human experience, but it's a very trepidous place to be, because it's not based on any real reality. And as soon as someone starts to disturb the level of my mask, or you disturb the mask of someone else's, then so many problems are coming in the relationship. Is it not so? Whether that's friendship, family, whatever, because it's a false identity. So you've got one false identity meeting another false identity, and hey, let's try really hard to not disturb each other's false identity. And as long as that happens, then everything will be very nice. But, and particularly in relationships, it's like having a mirror in front of you, and everything's reflected back, all the falsities of your identity. So relationships can be very great for purifying the mirror. And so in former times, the art was very much orientated around, as I've mentioned, spiritual or religious principles and the art was to invoke an expansion of the chitta, expansion of the mind space, and get you away from just being absorbed in the impressions and the grossification of the subtle body. And so a culture, a real culture, the arts, the sciences, the dance, every aspect was orientated around the expansion of consciousness, the expansion of the chitta, the expansion of the mind space. But very much in modern times, the art, the culture, the dance, the cinema, everything is adding to the contraction of consciousness. And society is becoming more and more destabilized by this, and people are becoming more and more unhappy because of this. Because in previous times, practically all art was spiritual. And so, as Mohan Prabhu mentioned before, in Italy, I think it was in Italy, well, actually, it happened in Germany and Italy, that in two separate museums, the cleaner destroyed an art piece because they thought it was trash.
But it's just creating contraction of consciousness.
So this is the art piece from Italy. This is my high-tech sharing, online sharing. So just think about that. If you went to a museum, and you probably have to maybe pay money to go there, and you saw that on the floor with no pulpit or anything describing what it is, what would you think? What would be the effect on your chitta, on your consciousness? Would you think, oh, this invokes a sense of awe and beauty, and oh, I feel my place in the universe, I belong? Would it invoke that? There must be a God. I must be a soul.
How do you define expansion of consciousness?
Well, it's a subjective thing, but how do you describe a sunset? So that feeling when you see a sunset or a sunrise or someplace in nature, and how do you feel when you have a broken heart or someone says, oh, something very cruel to you? There's a feeling of a contraction in the body, emotionally, but also mentally, because then you're focusing very much on that thing that person thought. So you're hyper focused on the mental narrative you have in your chitta, in your mind space, and in a state of awe and reverence, like the sunset. In one sense, you're focusing on the sun, but it's leading to an expansion of consciousness. And we'll go more into that when we go into the science of chitta and concentration, describing samadhi. But depending on what you're focusing on, one thing can lead to the expansion of consciousness, and one thing can lead to the contraction of consciousness, because they also have an energetic composition, which is favorable for the promotion of consciousness, and some just destabilize the consciousness. Yeah.
Yeah, just something little I wanted to add. It depends, like when we see some beautiful art, like when our chitta is very unstable anyway, then we won't like because of many thoughts, then we won't experience this expansion of the chitta, no matter how beautiful anything is.
Yeah, so that's why we want to be in a society or following a culture where everything we're doing is leading to the expansion of consciousness. Yeah, I shared an example in the first class about a fish. I'll share it again because it's very good. If there's a fish swimming in the ocean and there's some disturbance on the surface of the ocean, then the fish can descend down into the depths of the ocean and not feel any disturbance there. But you take that same fish and you put it in a teacup, then every disturbance upon the surface of the teacup, it feels that so much. Yeah? So when when we're having a bad day, our consciousness is very contracted, the chitta is very contracted in that day. And anyone just looks at you the wrong way, oh, you feel it so much, and you go into a big mind narrative about it. Oh, they think this and that, and they're da-da-da-da-da-da-da. But if you're having a very nice day, some days you just wake up and, I feel like today, the sun's out, and just for no apparent reason, because your chitta, your mind space is expanded. And then if something happens, you're walking down the street and someone says, oh, I don't like your haircut. You just, oh, well, that's a bit mean, but it doesn't worry you. So the whole spiritual project, in one sense, is to expand your chitta, expand the contextual horizon. And very much today, our contextual horizon, the whole mainstream narrative in society is very narrow. So we're always in this state of contraction. And you can alleviate this state of contraction by buying more stuff. That will make you happy. So this is very much anti-culture. And one more little example of throwing away art. There was another cleaner. The art piece was biscuits, some crumbled biscuits and biscuit crumbs. So then she threw that away. Oh, here's another interesting point, the shape of art. Because if you reflect back, like here being in India, you can go to many temples and you see very ornate carvings and amazing artistry around the place. But it wasn't just some two-dimensional piece sitting in a museum. It was three-dimensional, it had texture, it had depth. There was a lot to it. And it wasn't just some square box sitting in the museum in a square building, and you drove there in your square car. So very much today we're in a society that propagates square box thinking, because all day we're on our phones, which is very square, and we sleep in a square box, we get up from our square box and we sit down at our square table and we get our breakfast out of a square box and we put that in a round bowl, and then we go into our square car, we drive along the road, we go to our square building and we sit down in our square cubicle and we stare at the screen, working away, and very much it creates a compartmentalization in the consciousness. And okay, so we start to think in that way, that things aren't interrelated, and this is very much the narrative of material science, trying to break everything down, like chemistry, biology, all these different aspects of nature that they try to analyze that aren't necessarily related. And of course this has some utility, such as medical field and stuff like this, but we start to lose sight of how everything is interconnected in nature, in reality, the cosmos, and coming back to a single source. So in our thinking, we start to work in such a way, okay, I've learnt this subject matter, and I've got one box in my mind for this, one box in my mind for that, one box in my mind for religion, one box in my mind for spirituality, one box in my mind for God, and I just file them away in this little area, or put a question mark there. And so we're always thinking in square box terms. And so the art, I won't go into that so much today, but it's very interesting if you study the history of art, the contraction of consciousness and the direct correspondence with how art changed with that. If you look at it from a theological or philosophical analysis, how the correlation between the contraction of consciousness from like the time of Socrates, and then how art transformed down and down today to the time of nominalism. It's quite an interesting subject, but that'll be a class for another time. So we want to think outside of the box. And so this is spiritual life. So as most of you guys have heard before, this chitta, this mind space, it has varying degrees of clarity, and the more unfocused, the more unsteady it becomes, the harder and harder it is to understand what is truth, what is reality, where do we fit in. So the first stage of mind, going from the most unsettled to the most focused, that first stage is called shipta, where the mind's wandering here and there and there, here and here and here, and it cannot concentrate on anything, jumping around like a grasshopper. And very much the modern culture feeds into this kind of mind state by constant scrolling, addiction to social media, cinema, the food. It's very much feeding into creating more and more attention deficit disorder. And because the mind space is so unsettled, when the mind space is unsettled, we cannot understand any subject matter properly. Doesn't matter even if it's the most simplest thing. When our mind is in a state of oscillation, we can't understand. And it's particularly problematic for the youth today, because right from when they're young, they're growing up with this luminous square box cell phone and just completely enthralled in that. How can they concentrate? And so the next stage, from Shipta to Mudha, tamas. And so this stage is like, you've been out late last night, maybe partying or drinking. I know none of you have ever done that in your life. And then you wake up in the morning and you have a hangover and you just feel dull. And can't think, practically no brain activity. So this is the stage of mudha. So most people in society, they're fluctuating between these first two stages, shipta and mudha. And so it's like people can't concentrate, jumping here and here and here, watching TV, all propagating shipta, disturbed mind space. And then at the end of their working week, they go to the pub in many Western countries, get completely annihilated, and then descend down into tamas. And this is their life. This is the cycle of their life. And maybe a little bit, there's the next stage called vikshipta, which is a balance between sattva and rajas. So there's a little bit of, there is concentration, but you can't hold that trance or concentration for a prolonged period. Because to be able to concentrate on one subject matter, one object for any length of time is very, very difficult in the current atmosphere. Everything does not promote this kind of concentration. So this is why we can't understand anything, because the mind is so disturbed. And then for the next stage, for those who are engaged in spiritual practice or have some discipline, the next stage is called akagrita. And this is sattvic in nature. And in this stage, you can sit, your mind can be focused completely. And this is the first stage of samadhi. And from there, so many other stages open, and we'll explore more of that another time. And so the next stage after that is called nirodha, or it's a nirgun state, where the gunas of material nature, the material energy, is completely restrained, and you can penetrate very deeply into any subject matter and understand it completely in its entirety in this state. And it's the insights are not coming from the thinking mind. Like even Einstein said with his theory of general relativity, this did not arise from the thinking mind. So in the stage of ekagrata, which can be induced by focusing on one object, then the consciousness actually expands. We'll go more into the science of that another time. And so whatever negativity we have in our life, in our own consciousness, anger, jealousy, hatred, etc., all of these things, they're all coming from a state of vikriti, a disturbed and distorted state of individual nature. And we want to follow a path that's going to bring us back to our state of prakriti. And in previous times, all the art was orientated around inducing us to move back towards a state of prakriti. But the modern mentality is, in terms of art, or in many ways really, it is the valorization of the trivial and the unimportant. Um, like Gurudev gives the example, if you go to a modern art museum and you see the centerpiece, the center art piece, it's maybe a black square on a white canvas, and that's it. And it's worth so many thousands of euros, and it's not invoking any deep contemplation of consciousness. It's just a projection of someone's own impressions in their own minds. But so because it's not linked to anything deeper, then it can't really invoke a deeper response from the individuals who are observing that art piece, and it doesn't promote dharma. The modern mentality is to very much promote adharma, not following religious principles or moral principles which are very conducive for the stabilization of consciousness, which then in turns brings about the expansion of consciousness. So in Vedic times, the art was very much made to promote values and to be more kind. So now let's consider an example which illustrates art and its effects that it has on one's consciousness. And here's an interesting quote. One philosopher once said, if you change the music of a society, after some time they will change their laws, because sound is very close to the mind. The sound of music has a powerful effect on our awareness, and a lot of art today is not a cultivation of the spirit, it's anti-art. So, still here in India very much, the music, even in Hollywood to a degree, Bollywood rather, but it's lessening more and more and more with Hollywood's influence. The Bollywood songs are still based on traditional ragas, and so those traditional ragas have a spiritual origin. So there's still some dovetailing there towards spiritual consciousness, and very much, even if you go out on the beach in the nighttime, maybe not the nighttime, but you can hear some bhajans playing from these cafes. So in countries like India, still very much the music has a religious or spiritual undertone to it. And in other countries, all the music is essentially glamorizing the destabilization of consciousness, the hypersexualization of society. And this is very, very destructive for the society in general, but also for our own happiness. So by changing the music doesn't here just mean sound, but also the art. Because art really guides and informs society. So when the art pieces, that which should bring about awe and reverence, or that which people really respect, that starts to change, then that really has an effect on society, just like sound and music really has an effect on society. And then it starts to steer the whole society in a different direction. So in France, there's one, it's a series of sculptures, but there's one sculpture here.
Expand your picture.
So there's high tech. So this sculpture is showing one man and one woman, and they're sitting down reading a book. And the woman's name is Francesca de Rimini, and the man's name is Paolo Malatesta, and Mantesta. And so Francesca, she was married to Paolo's brother, and they were just sitting down and they were reading a book. And the book was actually about King Arthur and Lancelot. And King Arthur, his wife Guinevere, she had an affair with the knight Lancelot, and it had just got to this point in the book. And so Francesca was sitting next to Paolo, and it got to this point around the amorous affair, the Adamic activity, and that sparked within them this energy of lust. And then so Paolo, he reached over to kiss Francesca, but they didn't know that the husband, who was a cripple, he was actually hiding behind the curtain with a knife, and then he took that knife and he stabbed them both to death. This is a true story, by the way.
What is a creeper?
The husband was a crippled,
What is a creeper?
Someone who's
disabled. So then that was over, and they didn't even get to kiss. So this statue comes in a series of statues orientated around Dante Alighieri. Now, this is also the author of Dante's Inferno, based on the teachings of Saint Bernard. And in those writings, Saint Bernard, he goes down to, I think, the 7 levels of hell. And then on the 2nd level, he faints. Although he goes down further and further, it's only on the 2nd level that Dante faints and he loses consciousness. There's actually 9 levels. So why does he faint on the 2nd level? The answer is very profound. Because while he's on the 2nd level, there's like a tornado and a huge wind is coming, and then within that wind he sees 2 people, and those 2 people, they are reaching out to touch one another, but they just can't quite touch one another. And then he says, "Oh, who are you?" And then the woman, she says, "Oh, I'm Francesca de Rimini." And then the man says, "Oh, I'm Paolo Malatesta." And so because they had committed the offense of Adamic activity, or they tried to do it, and right at the time of death, then they descended down into hell, and they were stuck like that for eternity, always trying to reach out and embrace one another, but never not quite being able to do it. And so Dante Alighieri, he fainted at this because what instigated them to do that was reading that book that was promoting the amorous Adamic activity, and that sparked the impression in their consciousness to act. And earlier in his life, Dante Alighieri, he had written so much love poetry and novels with Adamic activity in it. And then he thought, oh, these people, they're suffering like this for eternity because they read one book. And I've written so many books and poems like this. How many thousands of people will be committing sins because of my inspiration, and what will come as the result of me writing this book? So Dante Alighieri, he fainted because of this. So if you go to places in Europe, you can see the statue of him contemplating.
It's the face of regret.
So you can just go like this right now and think for a moment. Oh, what have I done in my life? How much suffering have I brought about to other people? How much have I inspired Adamic activity, and what will be the result for me? So very much the art today, it is promoting this Adamic impressions in the consciousness, and this causes further and further oscillation in the space of the mind. So then our place in reality gets further and further harder to understand, and the whole society crumbles. So we can see this kind of Adamic impressions just permeating everything in this age of Kali. But one thing these sculptures are showing here, and we see this with a lot of the art in former times that it was promoting one, religious or spiritual content, but it was also promoting morals and values, and that it was actually glorious to follow a life of moral and values, and your destination in doing so would be auspicious. And now very much it has gone completely in the opposite direction, and it is very much promoting Adamic activity, and then people think, oh yes, this is art, a naked woman or something like this, a naked man, and then they just, for the people who view these things, these impressions go into their consciousness, and they collect and collect and collect, and they impel people to then act in Adamic ways. So in all universities around the world, in all Western influenced educational facilities, there's a shared meta-narrative, and that shared meta-narrative that goes on to inform and guide society in a particular direction. And there's one quote from Democritus, a Greek philosopher. He wasn't very popular at the time, but his theory is very prevalent these days. And his saying is, nothing exists except atoms and empty space. Everything else is opinion. So you just have atoms floating around in the universe, sometimes banging together, and then somehow when enough bang together, consciousness arises. But the meta-narrative here is there's no purpose, there's no cause, there's no direction to where this is going. And this is extremely destructive to our society. Without even going into whether it's true or not, or looking at belief, just the effects that narrative has on society, that the whole earth is completely a random occurrence. I have no ultimate purpose. There's no actual meaning to life. Then so many young people, also older people, but I particularly see it in the younger people, at least in the country that I'm living in. They turn to drugs, they turn to alcohol, because there is an existential emptiness there. They have a feeling that there's more to life, but there's no system that supports of how they can investigate what is that deeper purpose of life that I actually feel on some level. And okay, we can say there's so many religious institutions, and yes, they're giving some deeper meaning and some teachings are there, but because so much religious bad behavior has gone on in the name of religion, then there's a lot of aversion to religion. So this puts the youth of today in a very precarious position, because there's an innate feeling that there's something seriously wrong with the world, with how we're living, and they have a sense that there's something more, but the Western society, it doesn't really support how they can really come to a deeper level of understanding. What is their true nature? Who are they really? How do they fit into reality? What is this world? What is this place? What is this universe? Where is it all coming from? So then to escape those feelings, then they go into drugs, they go into just a life of distraction, and then they get conditioned enough, and going through school and family, oh, now you should just work so hard for 40 years, you should just do this and that, buy a house, that is the goal of life, get into debt, be a slave to the banks, and don't worry, if you don't like your job, on Friday night you can just get completely intoxicated enough so you completely forget about your suffering condition just for just for a few hours, so then next week you can go back and do it again. And this is the goal of life. And also you can save as much money as you can and buy as much things as you can, which just exploit the limited resources of this planet and cause further and further toxification of the earth. So on the flip side of that, let's consider some the Vedic perspective on things. And this perspective is not coming from a Western influence perspective of the world. And within the kind of, even the Western religious and spiritual art, it is still very much mixed with our worldly experience onto the art. So even if we see like great murals in churches in Europe and places like that, it very much paints a mood of God or religious figures in a king-like relationship, a hierarchy of awe and reverence, but it's mixed with our experience of this world, that God must be like a king up there in the heavens floating on a cloud, and he's got nothing better to do than kind of see what I'm up to down here. And it's very much mixed with our ideas of a king here on this world, and then we superimpose these worldly experiences onto the spiritual reality. And there's nothing wrong with that per se in terms of progressing from material consciousness to spiritual consciousness, but we don't want to stay there forever. And so the Vedic saints, and this is not just, I'm not talking about just Indian saints here, because this is also in other traditions as well, including Christianity. When they sit down and they go into trance and they go into samadhi, then what is revealed to them in their samadhi, then once they come out of samadhi, they share that experience, and that experience would then go on to inform art. So many of the temples, the paintings in previous times were all inspired by the realizations of the sages of that particular location. And so in this way, because their realizations were perceived from a place of consciousness beyond the oscillation of material nature, then there was a lot of power in that realization and the art that then came from a product of that realization. And so in this way, it was very much supportive to elevate our consciousness. So this is the Vedic conception of art, and this would not just go on to inform art in like an aesthetic sense of carvings or something like that. Also dance, all aspects of Vedic culture were all informed by the samadhi of the great saints. So then every part of life had a inbuilt Shakti to elevate your consciousness, to bring you back to the center, to put God, to put spirituality in the center of existence. The whole culture, the whole society was orientated around that. So whatever is your individual nature, if you like dance, if you like painting, whatever you do, then you could follow it in such a way that it'd be a service to God, and it could be an expression of the higher spiritual reality, instead of coming from a place of, oh, we're just random atoms here on earth, and you know, if 100 blind people get together, then suddenly they can see. Just like if a bunch of atoms get together, suddenly consciousness arises. This is completely absurd, and it's a very limited point of view. So again, I invite you to just close your eyes and come to a meditative posture. Oh, maybe just before you do that, here's one more picture to look at. So this is Vedic art. So this is Mahavishnu lying on the causal ocean, So in the Vedic understanding, each universe, which is like a little bubble, and in that universe it's so vast with millions and millions of planets. But those bubbles, they are emanating from the skin, the pores of the skin of Mahavishnu. So many millions and millions of uncountable universes. And here we are in one of those universes, very tiny little planet called Earth. And then if we zoom out from Earth, well, here we are in Goa, and Goa's on the Indian subcontinent, and from the Indian subcontinent there's so much landmass on Earth, and then there's the oceans of the Earth. You zoom back further, there's so many planetary systems, and then the sun, and the moon, and then the whole Milky Way, the whole galaxy, and then from there going up to the higher celestial planets, and then from there the coverings of the universe, earth, water, fire, air, and space, and each one 10 times thicker than the previous. Very, very vast expanded consciousness. All this is contained in this art. And so it's very much expanding our consciousness, and the more and more you enter into this, it's like a yantra, and it just reveals itself in your consciousness. And so compare this to our absorption and the very temporary, limited things in our worldly experience, the contraction of like being the fish in the teacup, and just thinking the little occurrences in our tiny little one life is just everything. This is such a contracted state of consciousness. It's no wonder we can't find any happiness in the sandstorm of our teacup and the chitter of our mind space. So the whole modern society, it's taking us deeper and deeper and deeper into illusion. And so this picture of Mahavishnu, these cycles of creation, they happen every time Mahavishnu breathes in. Just like at the start of class, we breathed in and then we breathe out. But the breaths of Mahavishnu, one breath is 312 trillion years, something like this. Very, very long time. And so just by looking at this art, even if you're not mentally or intellectually understanding, there's a transmission of consciousness which is so vast, so expansive. So all art previously was orientated in this direction. So very much it had real world practical applications of just helping you deal with the problems in your daily life, because when our consciousness is expanded, then whatever's happening in daily life, it's not such a big problem. It's not just some woo-woo guy with 4 arms painted on a wall. There's a whole transmission of reality. It has real practical implications. But God as being the regulator or the controller of the universe, this is not in any way the ultimate manifestation of God. Because Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, everything rests on me like pearls on a thread. If you have a pearl necklace and that so many pearls, they're threaded together, they are joined together on the thread of the necklace. So Krishna is the original form of Godhead, but he has expansions, and one of those distinct expansions, that is Mahavishnu, from whom all the material universes are emanating with his breath in and then breath out. Creation, destruction, creation, destruction. So the original form of God, Krishna, he has his own world, and he has his own associates, and he gets up to his own activities. So if you could expand yourself, then you would send your expansion to work, and you would go on permanent holiday, permanent vacation, and be enjoying. So Krishna, one of his distant expansions, he sends that to work, and you can go and create and maintain the universe, while I just have, come to Goa and have a good time. So the original form of Krishna, the original form of Godhead, this is the origin of all beauty, of all art. And Krishna is so beautiful, and of all beings in creation, he is the most attractive. That's why his name is Krish. Krish means attractive, and he has the most joy, ananda, in all of existence. So all art, all beauty finds its origin in Krishna. Now our Param Gurudev, Srila Bhaktivedanta Narayana Goswami Maharaj, he went into samadhi, he went into trance, and in his trance he saw Radha and Krishna. And when he came out of trance, then he informed Shamarani Didi what he saw in his trance. And in that, she's a famous painter, and from what was inspired by the trance of Narayana Maharaj, then she went on to create this painting, this famous painting of Sevakunj. So even in modern times, the great saints, they still have the power to go beyond material nature and to see the highest reality of God, Radha and Krishna. And from that, wonderful art is coming. So this pastimes of Radha and Krishna, this is the origin of all spiritual art, because love, beauty, and Krishna's abode of Goloka Vrindavan, there is dance, there is drama, all these things are going on. And so this is inspiring. This is Shamaradi Didi painting after receiving guidance from Narayana Maharaj. So how amazing is this art? It's a far cry from champagne bottles on the floor in a museum. It's coming from a completely different source. So in Goloka Vrindavan, Krishna is the supreme artist. And why is he the supreme artist? Because Kalaha means that the heart of God is filled with love. And then that love causes the natural expression within him. It causes him to sing, it causes him to dance, it causes him to play his flute. And that love, it overflows from his heart, and it expands into the form of Radharani, the female form. And from Radharani, that love continues to expand into so many other female goddesses. And the love of Krishna with his devotees is an eternal exchange. Krishna loves his devotees, and the devotees love him. So in Goloka Vrindavan, there is singing, there is dancing, there is drama. So much variety and activity is there. And a very, very distant expansion, the remnants, the crumbs, the cookie crumbs, they come down to this world, and they, in a very small way, inspire art down here and give some glimpse. So this was the origin of traditional spiritual art. And in this way, it was guiding us back home, back to where we truly belong, and where we can be in harmony with the original artist of creation. So I think that's all I want to say today. That's more than enough. Yeah. So any thoughts, reflections, questions, any doubts, and any of that? Your input is most welcome and appreciated. speak into the mic.
what can we do to support expression, art, creativity to be more aligned and supportive of the expansion of consciousness rather than contraction?
These great saints, they don't just tell someone how to paint a nice picture. They are very diverse in their sharing of the arts. So they also give us instructions, they give us writings, they give us teachings. And these teachings, these instructions, they, in so many different areas of our life, if we follow them, then that leads to the expansion of consciousness. And whatever is our swabhav, our nature in this life, then we can work with that nature in such a way that it becomes a artistic expression of the love that we feel for the divine. So the more that we become purified, when our chitta is in a state of clarity, equilibrium, love of God naturally shines through, and your individual expression for the love of God naturally shines through. It's not that it has to be created. It's like the rays of the sun. They just naturally shine. So the rays of love coming off your own soul will just naturally emanate when our chitta is at a state of equilibrium. So by following the artistic teachings of the Guru, then the beautiful art of your own soul will begin to shine. So this is one way. And another thing I just want to mention, that I don't want to downplay any individual's the creative expression that moves through them, because today there's so many creative people, and I'm not saying that everyone should just do religious art only or something like that. But one point here is, in the modern society, it very much propagates a mentality of individuality and ownership. So we think if we have some talent, then this is my talent. I possess this talent. I'm an artist. I'm a singer. Blah, blah, blah. But if you're an asshole, you don't say, I'm an asshole. Because if you have some bad quality, you don't claim that quality. But if you have some nice quality, then you claim ownership of it, yeah? But actually, these things are moving through us. Just like so many emotions come, even during one day, many, many emotions. And then we think, oh, this is my emotion. Or if someone invokes an emotive response in you, then if that's something you like, then you want to be around that person more. Or if it's something you don't like, then you want that person to go away. So very much if we're having thoughts, or if we're having particular emotional experiences, then there's very much in the modern culture a pathologization of that this is ours, we own it. But actually we don't own it, because if you own it, how come you can't just turn it on and off like a light switch? You cannot. So these things move through our field of experience. So it's the same way with the creative expressions. We don't own them. They're a gift from God. And so we can work with that gift, and if in a particular life, accordance with our swabhav, we have the blessings of a particular artistic expression, like painting or singing or something like that, we can work with that as a service, but we don't possess that. We don't possess anything, actually. So this is a big problem in modern psychology, actually. So I'm not saying that you should deny your emotions or your thoughts. I'm saying, oh no, they're not mine, so I'll carry on all this nonsense behavior. But it's not part of your eternal identity, and these things are just moving through like clouds through the sky. So you can work with it, and you can utilize it in service, but don't create an identity around being an artist and have a whole mental narrative around it, because soon that cloud will pass through the sky, and where will it go? So we want to have a mood of service, and however the divine chooses to bless us, then be very humble and grateful for that, and work in harmony with that expression. So hopefully in some way that pointed towards something. Any other questions? Complaints?
Does it make me think, you know, it's, yeah, like what comes to mind is obviously an R line. Must, you know, we can have this conversation because there's no else here, but you know, like doing japa meditation, these things that help clear our chitta. The way I understood your answer is, yeah, following guru, following the practices which our saints, you know, tell us to follow to help clear our chitta, and then naturally through having a clearer chitta and having, then like you say, that light can shine more through that pure expanded consciousness.
Yeah, and it's not just our saints. It's all saints around the world, and in most religious traditions, like in Christianity, there's the 10 Commandments. In Buddhism, there's the 8 precepts. In yoga, there's the yams and the niyamas. So every path has some moral codes and observances to stabilize the chitta, or basically rules and regulations of things we don't want to follow. But if we actually follow them, then the chitta becomes stabilized and we'll actually obtain the happiness that we're actually seeking. But because the modern culture has very much gone away from following a lifestyle that will stabilize the chitta, then we're in this endless pursuit of trying to obtain happiness in something else, which always ends in frustration, because it never leads to any kind of lasting happiness. And then we just tread on this hamster wheel again and again and again until we die, going further and further into a more state of vikriti. So, and like Madhava alluded to earlier, like we think, oh, so I want to become a great artist now. I've heard about this art, and if my chitta becomes clear, then maybe I'll be able to become a great painter or something like that. But you may already have some ability to do some cooking, and the more we surrender to the spiritual path and follow those instructions, then whatever nature we already have, that becomes our artistic expression. Doesn't mean you can't learn new things and share new things, but everyone already has some talent, and it's just manifesting that more. So whatever you do, just do it for Krishna, do it for Guru, and then in this way Krishna will become happy, Guru will become happy, and you'll also become happy, and all three of you will dance together in happiness. You don't look satisfied.
No, I am. I think I'm quite tired, so maybe my face isn't necessarily showing the emotional response right now.
But these things don't happen overnight, you know, because we've been in a state of vikriti since beginningless time. So there's quite a process to come to an abiding state of clarity and be situated in that all the time. And very much because we think in terms of compartmentalization, we have very much lost the synchronicity between different aspects of reality. And we very much think in terms of black and white. It should be like this, or it should be like that. And the more your chitta becomes steady, the more all the apparent paradoxes of reality or contradictory things, they won't cause disturbances in your consciousness, because you're tuning into the plane of harmony, but that plane of harmony has variety. But when we're trying to understand that through a conditioned mind, so many things seem to be in contradiction to one another. But that's why we have to follow the teachings of the saints. Arambol.